Elara was a quiet soul, a weaver of silk who kept her head low and her heart guarded. But the world is a hungry beast, and one rainy evening, the beast bit back. It happened in a flash of cold metal and rough hands. Men with hollow eyes and jagged breath snatched her from the marketplace, throwing a heavy sack over her head before the screams could even leave her throat. They didn't want her silk. They wanted a ransom her family could never pay. She was dragged into the belly of an old, rotting warehouse by the docks, where the smell of salt and decay hung thick in the air. There she was bound to a wooden chair, the ropes biting into her wrists like angry snakes. She was a bird in a cage of shadows, waiting for a dawn that felt like it would never come. The kidnappers whispered of dark things, their voices like sandpaper against her nerves. They were the Vultures, a gang known for taking lives as easily as breaths. Elara closed her eyes, praying to the silent stars, not knowing that the stars had already sent a demon to save her. She could hear the rain drumming on the tin roof, a rhythmic countdown to her end. But then the drumming stopped. A heavy silence fell over the warehouse, a silence so thick it felt like physical weight. The Vultures stopped talking. They felt it too, the arrival of something far more dangerous than themselves. The heavy iron doors of the warehouse didn't just open, they groaned as if the hinges were screaming in terror. A single figure stepped through the mist, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. This was Ji-Hoon, a man whose name was whispered in the darkest corners of Oakhaven like a curse or a prayer. He was the head of the Iron Lotus, a syndicate that ruled the city's underworld with a silent, frozen fist. He didn't carry a gun and he didn't shout. He simply walked. Each footstep was slow, deliberate, and echoed with the finality of a heartbeat stopping. The Vultures scrambled, their bravado melting away like wax near a flame. They raised their weapons, their hands shaking so violently the metal clattered. Ji-Hoon didn't blink. His coat, blacker than the night itself, swirled around his ankles like ink in water. His eyes were cold, like polished obsidian, reflecting nothing but the grim reality of the room. He looked at Elara, tied and trembling, and for a fraction of a second, the ice in his gaze seemed to crack. It wasn't pity, it was possession. He didn't know her, but in that moment, the universe decided she belonged to him. The leader of the Vultures stepped forward, trying to find his voice. "This isn't your business, Lord Ji-Hoon," he croaked. Ji-Hoon stopped 5 paces away, his hands folded behind his back. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't speak to the kidnappers, he spoke to the room, and the room listened. "Everything in this city," he whispered, his voice a low vibration, "is my business." What followed was not a fight, but a harvest. Ji-Hoon moved with a grace that was terrifying to behold, a blur of motion that defied the human eye. He didn't use flashy movements, he used efficiency. Within minutes, the warehouse was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the defeated and the soft whimpering of Elara. He stood amidst the chaos, his suit unruffled, not a single drop of blood staining his white shirt. He walked toward Elara, his shadow stretching long and thin across the floorboards. She pulled back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She feared him more than she had feared the Vultures. He was a predator of a different caliber. He reached out and she flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he produced a small silver knife. With a flick of his wrist, the ropes that bound her fell away. She slumped forward, her legs too weak to support her, but he caught her. His hands were large and warm, a startling contrast to the coldness of his eyes. He didn't say, "You're safe," or "It's over." He simply lifted her into his arms as if she weighed no more than a bundle of silk. He carried her out of the warehouse, past the fallen men, and into the pouring rain. A sleek black car waited at the curb, its engine purring like a satisfied cat. He placed her in the back seat and sat beside her, his presence filling the small space until she felt she could breathe only his scent, sandalwood, and gunpowder. The car sped through the winding streets of Oakhaven, heading away from the docks and toward the hills where the great mansions sat like crowns. Elara sat huddled against the leather door, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. "Where are you taking me?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice cracking. Ji-Hoon didn't look at her. He was staring out the window at the passing lights. "To a place where the vultures cannot fly," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that suggested he wasn't just offering protection, he was claiming it. They arrived at a fortress of stone and glass, guarded by men who stood as still as statues. This was his lair, the heart of the Iron Lotus. He led her inside, through halls lined with ancient art and floors of polished marble. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum where the air was too thin to breathe. He led her to a room filled with soft blankets and the scent of lavender. "Sleep," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. "Tomorrow, your new life begins." Elara wanted to argue, to demand to go home to her small cottage in her loom. But looking at him, she realized that her old life had ended the moment he stepped into that warehouse. She was no longer a weaver of silk. She was a guest of the dragon. As she lay in the oversized bed, she heard the soft click of the door locking from the outside. She wasn't a captive of the vultures anymore, but she wasn't free either. The next morning, the sun crawled over the horizon, casting long, golden fingers into Elara's room. She woke up to find a tray of food that looked like a feast. Fruits she had never seen, bread still warm from the oven, and tea that smelled of jasmine. Beside the tray was a new dress, made of the finest silk she had ever touched. It was a deep midnight blue. She dressed slowly, her mind racing. She tried the door, and to her surprise, it was unlocked. She stepped out into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. The mansion was quiet, but she felt eyes on her from every shadow. She wandered down a grand staircase and found Ji-Hoon sitting in a glass-walled study, reading a newspaper as if he weren't the most feared man in the city. He looked up as she entered, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. "The color suits you," he said simply. Elara walked to his desk, her hands trembling. "I want to go home, Lord Ji-Hoon. Thank you for saving me, but I belong in the village." Ji-Hoon set the paper down and stood up. He walked toward her until he was close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. "The village is gone, Elara," he said softly. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He turned to the window. "The vultures burned your cottage to the ground last night. They were looking for you. If I let you go now, you will be dead before sunset." The news hit Elara like a physical blow. Her home, her silk, her memories, all ashes. She sank into a nearby chair, the weight of her reality crushing her. Ji-Hoon watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. He offered a sanctuary. "You are safe here," he said. "My men are everywhere. No one enters these grounds without my permission, and no one leaves." The last 3 words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Elara looked at him, realizing the trade she had inadvertently made. Life for liberty. "How long?" she asked. Ji-Hoon walked to the door, stopping with his hand on the frame. "Until I say otherwise." Over the next few days, the mansion became her world. She was given everything she could desire: books, music, the finest food. But she was never alone. A man named Kale, Ji-Hoon's silent second in command, followed her at a distance whenever she walked in the gardens. He was like a shadow made of muscle and scars. She tried to talk to him, but he only bowed and pointed back toward the house. She realized she was a golden bird in a platinum cage. Ji-Hoon would join her for dinner every evening. They sat at opposite ends of a long table, the silence between them filled with unspoken questions. He would watch her eat, his eyes tracking every movement of her hands. It wasn't the gaze of a lover, nor a captor. It was the gaze of a man watching a miracle he didn't quite understand. One evening, Elara gathered her courage. "Why me?" she asked, her voice echoing in the vast dining hall. Ji-Hoon paused, his wineglass halfway to his lips. "Why did you save me? There are 1,000 girls in Oakhaven." Ji-Hoon set the glass down. The candlelight played across the sharp angles of his face. "Because you didn't scream," he said. "When they had you in that chair, you weren't screaming for mercy. You were staring at the door, waiting for the end with your dignity intact. I found that interesting." Elara frowned. "You saved me because I was interesting?" Ji-Hoon stood up and walked the length of the table. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "I saved you because I recognized you. We are the same, Elara. We are both survivors of a world that wants to break us. But while I chose to become the hammer, you chose to remain the silk. I want to see how long the silk can last before it tears." He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely fear. She realized then that Ji-Hoon was lonely. In his world of blood and betrayal, she was something pure, something he could keep for himself to prove that beauty still existed. But his protection was a suffocating shroud. She began to notice things, the way the guards tightened their grip on their rifles when she came near the gate, the way the phone lines were always dead when she tried to use them. As weeks turned into a month, Elara began to feel the walls closing in. The mansion, for all its beauty, was a tomb. She decided she had to test the boundaries. One afternoon, while Kyle was distracted by a phone call, she slipped into the kitchen and found a back service entrance. She pushed the door open and ran toward the perimeter fence, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm. She reached the iron bars, her breath coming in gasps. The woods lay just beyond, dark and inviting. She reached for the latch, but a hand clamped over hers. It was cold and firm. She turned to find Ji-Hoon standing behind her, his face a mask of disappointment. "I told you, Elara, no one leaves." He didn't sound angry, he sounded weary, as if he had expected this betrayal. He didn't drag her back, he simply held her hand against the gate. "Do you see those woods?" he asked, pointing to the dark tree line. "My scouts found 3 vulture snipers there this morning. They are waiting for you to step outside. They want to use you to get to me." Elara's blood ran cold. "They want to kill me?" Ji-Hoon stepped closer, his body shielding hers from the woods. "They want to hurt what is mine, and you, Elara, are very much mine." He led her back to the house, his grip on her hand never loosening. That night, she wasn't sent to her room. He led her to his private balcony where the city of Oakhaven lay spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. "Look at the city," Ji-Hoon said, his voice blending with the wind. "It looks peaceful from here, doesn't it? But down there, it's a war zone. I spent 20 years building a wall around this city to keep the chaos out, but the chaos always finds a way in." He turned to her, the moonlight making his skin look like marble. "The vultures are just the beginning. There are others who want my throne. They see you as my weakness." Elara looked at the lights, feeling a strange sense of vertigo. "I never asked to be your weakness," she whispered. Ji-Hoon leaned against the railing. "You didn't, but you are. The moment I carried you out of that warehouse, I told the world that I had something I cared about. In my world, caring is a death sentence." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something human in his eyes, a deep-seated fear. He wasn't afraid of the vultures. He was afraid of losing the one thing that made him feel alive. "I won't let them take you," he vowed, "but that means you can never leave my sight. You will eat when I eat, sleep where I sleep, and walk where I walk." The intensity of his declaration left Elara breathless. It was a romantic sentiment wrapped in a terrifying reality. She was his anchor, but she was also his prisoner. He moved toward her, and this time she didn't pull away. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "Do you understand?" She nodded slowly. "I understand." The next few days were a blur of constant presence. Ji-Hoon took his words literally. When he had meetings with his lieutenants, Elara sat in the corner of the room, a silent witness to the mechanics of power. She heard names of men to be removed and shipments to be intercepted. It was a brutal education. She saw the way his men looked at her, with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. To them, she was a liability, a toy their boss had become obsessed with. But Ji-Hoon ignored them. His focus was entirely on her. He bought her more silks, more jewels, more books. He was trying to buy her happiness, or perhaps her compliance. One afternoon, while they were in the library, Elara found an old photograph hidden in a book. It showed a young Ji-Hoon with a woman who had a smile just like hers. "Who is she?" Elara asked. Ji-Hoon took the photo from her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "My sister," he said, his voice tight. "The vultures took her 10 years ago. I wasn't fast enough then." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. His obsession with her safety wasn't just about her. It was about a debt he could never repay to the past. He was reliving his trauma through her, determined to change the ending this time. "I'm not her, Ji-Hoon," Elara said softly. He looked at her, his eyes dark and hollow. "I know. You're still breathing." Tension in the mansion reached a breaking point when an explosion rocked the front gate. The vultures had launched a direct assault. The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls, a sharp contrast to the classical music that usually played. Ji-Hoon didn't panic. He moved with a cold, calculated efficiency. He grabbed Elara and pulled her into a hidden panic room behind the library's bookshelves. It was a small, steel-lined chamber with monitors showing the chaos outside. "Stay here," he commanded, checking a handgun he had pulled from his waistband. "Do not open this door for anyone but me." Elara watched the screens as Ji-Hoon and his men engaged the invaders. It was a dance of shadows and light. She saw Ji-Hoon move through the smoke, a vengeful god reclaiming his territory. He was terrifying, but she realized with a jolt that she was rooting for him. She didn't want the vultures to win. She didn't want him to fall. As she watched him fight, she saw him take a hit to the shoulder. He didn't stop. He kept pushing forward until the last of the invaders was gone. When the door to the panic room finally opened, Ji-Hoon stood there, bleeding and exhausted, but triumphant. He reached out a hand, and Elara took it, pulling him inside. She used her silk sleeves to stem the bleeding, her hands steady despite her fear. In that small, dark room, the power dynamic shifted. He had saved her, but now she was saving him. "You're hurt," Elara whispered, tearing a strip of her blue silk dress to wrap around his wound. Ji-Hoon watched her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him vulnerable. "It's just a scratch," he muttered, but he didn't pull away. He leaned his head back against the steel wall, closing his eyes. "They're getting bolder. They know I'm distracted." Elara looked at him, the man who held a city in his palm, now bleeding in a closet. "I'm the distraction," she realized aloud. Ji-Hoon opened his eyes. "You are the only thing that makes this city worth holding." The honesty in his voice was more frightening than the gunfire. He was admitting his soul was tied to hers. After the wound was dressed, they sat on the floor of the panic room, the silence of the mansion returning. The attack had been repelled, but the peace was fragile. Ji-Hoon looked at Elara, his gaze softening. "I should have let you go that first night. I should have given you money and sent you to another country. But I was selfish. I saw a light, and I wanted to keep it for myself." Elara looked at her ruined dress, the midnight blue stained with his blood. "You saved my life, Ji-Hoon, but you're killing my spirit." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek. "I know, and that is my greatest sin." He stood up, offering her a hand. "The house isn't safe anymore. We move tonight to the mountain retreat." The mountain retreat was a fortress carved into the side of a cliff miles away from the grime of Oakhaven. Here, the air was thin and cold, and the only sound was the wind howling through the pines. It was even more isolated than the mansion. Elara felt the weight of her solitude increasing. Ji-Hoon was always there, a silent sentinel. He no longer went to the city. He ran his empire through encrypted lines and hushed whispers. He spent his days watching the perimeter and his nights watching her. One evening, Elara stood at the edge of the cliff looking down at the clouds below. She felt like she was on the edge of the world. Ji-Hoon appeared behind her, as he always did. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elara replied. "It's a desert. Beautiful, but nothing grows here." Ji-Hoon stepped closer, the wind whipping his hair.
I can bring you anything you want. Seeds, soil, a greenhouse. I can make a garden in the sky for you. Elara turned to face him. I don't want a garden. I want to walk in a park where I don't know the names of the guards. I want to talk to a stranger without them fearing for their life. Ji-Hoon's face hardened. The world is not what you think it is, Elara. It is cruel and hungry. I am the only thing standing between you and the dark. Elara shook her head. You are the dark, Ji-Hoon. You're just the dark that happened to save me. Days turned into weeks in the mountain fortress. Elara began to notice a change in Ji-Hoon. The constant threat and the isolation were taking a toll on him. He became more paranoid, more possessive. He began to sleep in a chair outside her door, his hand always on his weapon. He wouldn't let her go into the garden without a vest of reinforced fiber. He was suffocating her with his protection. One night, Elara heard him talking in his sleep. He was calling out his sister's name, his voice thick with a decade of grief. She realized that she wasn't just a guest or a prisoner. She was a ghost. He was trying to keep his sister alive through her. She felt a wave of pity for the monster. She walked into his room and gently shook him awake. He bolted upright, his gun aimed at her chest before his eyes cleared. He saw it was her and lowered the weapon, his hand shaking slightly. I'm sorry. I thought. Elara sat on the edge of his bed. I know what you thought. You have to let her go, Ji-Hoon, and you have to let me go too. He looked at her, his eyes raw. I know. You're still breathing.
The isolation was broken by a betrayal from within. Kael, the silent second in command, had been bought by a rival syndicate. He knew the mountain retreat's weaknesses. One moonless night, the alarms didn't go off. The first Elara knew of the attack was the smell of smoke. She ran to her door, but it was locked from the outside. Ji-Hoon's protection. She pounded on the wood, screaming his name. Outside, she heard the sounds of a desperate struggle, metal clashing, muffled grunts, and the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the floor. Suddenly, the door was kicked open. It wasn't Ji-Hoon. It was Kael, his face splattered with blood. The boss is down, he said, his voice cold. Time to go, little bird. The vultures are paying a high price for you. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Elara didn't scream. She remembered what Ji-Hoon had said about her dignity. She reached for a heavy brass lamp on the bedside table and swung it with all her might. It caught Kael on the temple, dazing him. She didn't wait to see if he fell. She sprinted out of the room, through the smoke-filled hallway. She found Ji-Hoon in the main hall, surrounded by 3 men. He was fighting like a cornered wolf, but he was wounded. She didn't think, she acted. She grabbed a fallen sword from the wall display and threw it toward him. "Ji-Hoon!" she cried. He caught the blade mid-air, a fluid movement that seemed almost supernatural. With a roar of primal rage, he drove back his attackers. Elara didn't stay to watch. She ran toward the control room, remembering the layout she had memorized during her silent observations. She reached the panel and hit the emergency lockdown. Steel shutters slammed down over every window and door, trapping the invaders inside and cutting off their reinforcements. She then activated the fire suppression system, filling the halls with thick, white foam that blinded everyone. She crawled through the vents, a trick she had learned as a child in the village. She emerged in the main hall just as Ji-Hoon finished the last of the men. He was covered in blood and foam, looking more like a demon than a man. He saw her and dropped the sword, his knees buckling. She ran to him, catching him before he hit the ground. "We have to go," she whispered. "The lockdown won't hold forever." He looked at her, a strange smile touching his lips. "You saved me," he wheezed. The silk didn't tear. It became a cord. They managed to reach the secret escape tunnel hidden beneath the fireplace. As they crawled through the darkness, the fortress above them groaned and collapsed under the weight of the secondary explosives Ji-Hoon had set as a failsafe. They emerged on a lower mountain path, the cold air biting at their skin. They spent the night in a small cave, huddled together for warmth. Ji-Hoon's wounds were deep, and he was losing blood. Elara used the last of her strength to keep him awake. "Stay with me, Ji-Hoon. You can't leave me now, not after all this." He looked at her, his breath shallow.
Why? You're free now. You could walk away. Elara looked at the burning fortress in the distance, then back at the man in her arms. I'm not free as long as you're dying, she said. She realized that somewhere in the midst of the fear and the captivity, she had developed a bond with him that defied logic. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a deep, soul-searing connection. He was her protector, her captor, and now her responsibility. As the sun rose, a helicopter appeared in the sky. It bore the mark of the Iron Lotus, the loyalists who had remained. They were rescued and taken to a secure medical facility in a city far from Oakhaven. For the first time, Ji-Hoon was the one in a bed, and Elara was the one watching over him. She sat by his side for 3 days, refusing to leave. When he finally woke up, his first word was her name. She took his hand, her fingers interlocking with his. I'm here, she said. Ji-Hoon's recovery was slow. The betrayal by Kael had decimated his empire, and he had to rebuild from the ground up. But he was different now. The fire of his paranoia had been dampened by the reality of Elara's loyalty. He still wouldn't let her leave his side, but the why changed. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the present. He moved them to a coastal villa, surrounded by the ocean on 3 sides. It was peaceful, and for the first time, Elara felt like she could breathe. I'm stepping down, Ji-Hoon announced one morning over breakfast. Elara nearly dropped her tea. Stepping down? From the Iron Lotus? He nodded. I've handed the reins to my loyal lieutenants. I've kept enough to ensure we are never found, but the war is over for me. I'm tired of being the hammer. Elara looked at him, searching for the lie. And what about me? Am I still your prisoner? Ji-Hoon stood up and walked to her. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a key made of solid gold. This is the key to the main gate. It is never locked. You can walk out right now, and I will not stop you. I will give you enough money to live 10 lives in any city in the world. Elara looked at the key, then at him. Why now?
Because, Ji-Hoon said, his voice trembling, I realize that the only way to truly have you is to let you go. If you stay, I want it to be because you choose to, not because you have to. I don't want to be your jailer anymore, Elara. I want to be the man who earns your heart. Elara looked at the open gate in the distance. The path was clear. No guards, no snipers, no shadows. She could go back to being a weaver, back to a life of quiet silk and market days. She stood up and walked toward the gate. Ji-Hoon didn't move. He stood by the table, his head bowed, accepting his fate. She reached the gate and stepped through it. She felt the cool grass under her feet and the salt spray on her face. She was free. She walked 100 yards down the path, her heart racing. She waited for the relief, for the joy of liberty, but all she felt was a hollow ache in her chest. She turned around and looked back at the villa. Ji-Hoon was still standing there, a lonely figure against the vastness of the sea. She realized that the world outside was indeed big and beautiful, but it was also empty. He had become her world. She walked back through the gate, back into the garden, and back to the man who had risked everything to keep her. When she walked back into the villa, Ji-Hoon looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You came back, he whispered. I realized that I don't want to be silk anymore, Elara said, stepping into his arms. And I don't want you to be the hammer. We can be something else, something new. He held her tight, his heart beating against hers like a drum. From that day on, their life was different. They were still careful, for the ghosts of the past are not easily laid to rest, but the cage was gone. They traveled the world under assumed names, living in the shadows but finding light in each other. Ji-Hoon taught her how to defend herself, and she taught him how to appreciate the quiet beauty of a sunset. But the peace was not to last forever. A year later, a message arrived at their home in a small Italian village. It was a single black lotus flower, its petals dipped in blood. The vultures had found them. Ji-Hoon looked at the flower, his face turning back into the mask of the Mafia boss. They never learn, he growled. But this time, he didn't hide Elara away. He handed her a small, elegant pistol. Do you remember what I taught you? She nodded, her eyes steady. Then let's finish this together.
The final confrontation didn't happen in a warehouse or a fortress. It happened on the cobblestone streets of the village, under the watchful eyes of the ancient clock tower. The vultures had sent their best, but they were no match for a man who had nothing left to lose and a woman who had everything to gain. Elara moved through the shadows, a silent ghost, providing cover for Ji-Hoon. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a partner. They fought with a synchronicity that was beautiful and deadly. When the dust settled, the last of the vultures lay defeated. Ji-Hoon stood in the center of the square, his breathing heavy, but his eyes clear. He looked at Elara, who was standing a few feet away, her weapon lowered. "It's over," he said. "Truly over this time." They left the village that night, disappearing into the mist. They moved to a place where the mountains met the sea, a place so remote that even the stars seemed far away. There they built a house of stone and wood, with a garden that bloomed all year round. Ji-Hoon never let her leave his side, but she never wanted to. They were bound by a cord that was stronger than any rope, a bond forged in fire and silk. As the years passed, the legend of the Iron Lotus and the Weaver grew. People in Oakhaven still tell the story of the boss who disappeared for a girl. Some say he killed her, some say she killed him. But those who know the truth whisper a different tale. They tell of a man who found his soul in the eyes of a hostage, and a girl who found her strength in the heart of a monster. Elara and Ji-Hoon lived their lives in quiet contentment. They had children who knew nothing of the blood and the shadows, only of the love that held their world together. Ji-Hoon remained protective, of course. He would still check the locks twice at night and watch the horizon for shadows, but he did it with a smile now, a man who knew his treasures were safe. Elara continued to weave, but she didn't weave for money. She wove stories into her silk, stories of dragons and birds, of cages and keys. She became a wise elder in their small community, a woman whose advice was sought by all, and always, by her side, was a man with obsidian eyes that softened only for her. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun dip below the ocean, Elara turned to Ji-Hoon. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "Saving me. It cost you your empire, your name, your peace." Ji-Hoon took her hand, his skin weathered but his grip still firm. "I didn't lose an empire, Elara. I traded a kingdom of dust for a queen of light. It was the best deal I ever made." He pulled her closer, his scent still of sandalwood, though the gunpowder had long faded. "I would do it all again. I would walk into 1,000 warehouses, fight 1,000 vultures, just to see you standing here today." Elara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think you were the monster under my bed. Now I know you were the one keeping the monsters away." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one. The world was still a dangerous place, and there were always new shadows rising, but as long as they were together, the shadows had no power. In the end, every story is a circle. The girl who was taken by the beast became the beast's heart. The man who ruled by fear learned to rule by love. It is a folk tale for the modern age, a reminder that even in the darkest hearts, there is a spark of light waiting for the right breath to turn it into a flame. The Iron Lotus is gone, and the vultures are scattered to the wind. All that remains is the story. In the village of Oakhaven, they still find scraps of blue silk in the marketplace sometimes, and they say it brings good luck to those who find it. It is a symbol of the silk that wouldn't tear, the spirit that wouldn't break. And if you go to that remote place where the mountains meet the sea, you might see an old man and an old woman walking along the shore, their hands locked tight. He still won't let her leave his side, and she wouldn't have it any other way.